You all look way too serious for a Derbycon audience. I'm just saying. Like everybody's like, what do we do?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know what these shake weights are for. I am not juggling this. Luckily, it has an anti-theft device on it. This is for hecklers. We get to throw them. Like what? Wait, bring the clone trooper helmet in, I'll wear it. I really want to know what the shake weights are for.
You've never seen the commercial?
No. I meant, damn it. Oh, I've seen the commercial. No. Okay. Wow, well, we have a couple more minutes still, but the doors are shut.
Does that mean we start?
There's still a couple people coming in. They're shutting it.
We'll give them a few minutes.
Yeah, what the heck. How many people here have been able to come over and race the cars? Nobody? Okay, when we're done. Okay, well, of course you did. You worked the booth. Man. Okay, when we're done, everybody just goes out right there to the right. We have race cars. Hence the race shirts. It was a plan, right? So good morning, everybody. Good morning. Or afternoon. I don't keep track. It's really bad. So we got a couple minutes before we're going to start, but we might as well. The doors are shut. People are sitting. They're just staring at me. We're a little uncomfortable. Let's,
We got all these shake weights up here.
We have all these shake weights up here. I just don't understand the shake weights. They're weird. I don't understand them in general, and then to make it worse, they're on stage. Like, late night television at its best. So we're going to talk about the next gen web pen testing. We're going to cover some topics that we find interesting. Hopefully you will also. If not, Ken Johnson's talk next door. And just saying, right? So we've got a bunch of stuff to talk about. I don't know. We'll get into it, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you get?
All right. So somehow my slide ended up first. I actually worked
for
this
the
guy.
Slides.
Huh? You gave me the deck first.
Somehow it ended up first. He put it first.
So I work for him. Yeah.
No, that's
feel
a bio.
sorry for me. So I come from a developer background. We got any developers out here? It's got to be a bunch. Yeah, there we go. See? Developers are awesome. It's a good way to get started into security is having a good knowledge of how things are actually built, because then you can kind of start figuring out how to tear them down. So that's what I like to do.
Yeah.
And it's more fun tearing them down than it is building them. But now I get to actually build things to break things, which is pretty cool. So, also, I guess, done some open source stuff lately too. So that's the burp CO2 thingy and
which is broken
a few other.
Right now.
What's that?
Which is broken right now.
It works on my machine.
Well, of course it does.
In my spare time, when I'm not overly busy working on, like for this guy over here, I like to brew and I run. I wouldn't say I like to run, but I run because I brew, and that's got to stay in shape.
I'm in shape. I'm fat. It's a shape.
It's a shape. You are correct. So.
I'm Kevin. I'm not very excited about that because I've been Kevin for 43 years. I've been Kevin Johnson for 18 less than that. I'm the founder of Secure Ideas. We're a consulting firm out of Jacksonville, Florida. I mention that because, well, I'm a greedy capitalist, and we are hiring. We have 2 open positions. I don't know any consulting firm that isn't hiring right now. It's nuts out there, but of course you can't work for anywhere better. My opinion. I might be biased. I'm also an IANS faculty member, as is Gillum. He didn't mention that though, right?
This is true.
And I'm an author and instructor. I've written a web pen testing curriculum for a certain large without security training company. I don't know. And do a lot of other things, teach at Black Hat, OWASP, what have you. I like to tell people I'm an international speaker because I've been to Australia once. Kind of like the Jacksonville International Airport. It flies to the Bahamas once a week, right? I was actually saying that sometime in Jacksonville, and some guy like got really offended. He's like, "We're an international airport." I'm like, "Really? Where's customs?" And let's be clear, Atlanta isn't the right answer. But so teach around, speak around all over the place. I'm also, like I said, a pen tester. My background is varied. I've been involved in IT for about 25 years, doing both development and system administration. I'm old and fat and lazy, right? I do a lot of interesting things, I think, but they're all work-related. The one thing that isn't work-related that I'm actually pretty proud of, my wife says it's the nerdiest thing I've ever done, and I told Denise, she met me when I was 26, so she doesn't know. I am a member of the 501st Legion. The 501st is a charity group. What we do is we build and wear screen-accurate Star Wars costumes and raise money for charity. There are 10,000 members around the world. I had nothing to do with that. I just happen to be one member. But I have a lot of fun with it. So you get to see me do a 5K in a Vader costume in a couple weeks to raise money for breast cancer.
We do have a couple of...
Wait. Before you applaud, I want to make sure you understand. I said do a 5K, not run a 5K. I just want to be clear, right? And it will be hot. Yeah. I have a wife and kids. Yeah, they admit it. Brenna and Sarah, my daughters, they are awesome. When Brenna was born, I realized that every parent in the world realizes that their child is the most incredible, smartest, beautiful, best kid in the world. The second thing I realized is every other parent is wrong. But, so, that's me, right? So we're going to talk about, I forgot you had a remote. Web applications are getting complex, right? A number of years ago, I was asked to write the web pen testing curriculum for a large training company. And so I did. And at that time, websites were pretty simple, right? And if you think back to the beginning, right, I laughed and joked about this the other day, is the very first website I ever built, I had a customer come to me and say, "Can you build me a website?" And I said, "A what?" Because it was like 95, right? And I'm like, huh? And
a website, like, you know?
Yeah, website. Yeah. So I did some research on a Gopher site and found out how to build a web page. Told everybody I knew that, you know, the gray background, black text, blue links, unless you clicked them and they were purple, was going nowhere. The web was stupid. I mean, come on. We had bulletin board systems. We had telnet servers, right? Yeah! All this kind of cool stuff. I don't drink. Yeah, but thank you.
You drink? Yeah.
So it was just going to go nowhere. As you can tell, I was right. So if you want any investing advice, talk to me later. But we have applications, right, that have become very, very complex. We have also changed the way applications work, where instead of a lot of different pages that you make the request to and everything else, you have these single-page apps that a lot of the traffic happens, a lot of the business logic happens client-side, right? And for people who remember, right, you guys remember when PayPal rolled out their shopping cart and the price was client-side? Yes, right? That's where we're going back to.
So how many? We have pen testers out here. How many do web pen tests? Quite a few. Lots of you. So when you saw your first single-page app, how many of you went, "Oh my God, what do I do with this?" You know, it's like it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. You know, I can't just click on things. It doesn't. Yeah. So that's basically what we're going to talk about. I put the remote down.
You did put the remote down.
Put it down. It confused me.
Development has also changed, right? We're now agile.
Agile.
I'm sorry. I've seen most development teams. Agile is not the word I would describe those people. Says the fat guy on stage. But, right? We're moving things faster, and this is actually a good thing. When we talk about things like Docker and containers and cloud, right? I remember years ago, and like I said, I'm old and curmudgeonly, right? But we would order a server when I was at Blue Cross, and it would take 6 months to receive the server. And that was after procurement had approved it, right? And they would build it, and it would ship out, and you'd have all this process and everything else. Yesterday afternoon, I built a server on AWS in 3 seconds. And I'd like to say that's because I'm amazing. But the reality is, it's a button. I need a server. Thank you. I need another, right?
That's nothing. I built 4 in 3 seconds.
Yeah, there you go. You're right. See? Always proving me better. You better. So,
that's agile.
Well, you definitely fit the agile name better than I do. But all of this stuff is changing to now the point where security, IT, whoever, has to get involved with deployments that are happening daily, hourly, right? There was a company, and I can't remember the name of them, but they were a pretty big company, and they were bragging about the fact that they were deploying 300 times a week to production. And I will admit, I laughed because my immediate thought when they said, we deploy 300 times a week to production was, wow, your code sucks that bad that you have to deploy 300 times a week? That wasn't what they meant. No. But how do you embed security in that? How do you ensure that you're able to test, especially as with modern applications, most automated tools are failing to find the flaws that exist, right? What do? Well, it's time to change. We need to adapt. And so we're going to talk, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a couple technologies that change testing and how you can address it. For example, we're going to start with HTTP2, right? And then we'll talk about Samurai WTF, which is a small environment you guys may have heard of. So how many people here use HTTP2? Every single one of you should raise your hand because you're on the internet today. And many of the most common sites used, Twitter, Facebook, stuff like that, are using HTTP2. Now, you may not be developing for it, but that's okay because the development doesn't change. You're deploying to the server that can handle it. Your application shouldn't care which protocol, whether it's 1.0, 1.1, 2.0, doesn't matter to your application.
Your browsers already support it.
Exactly. The browsers support it. It is a huge change from 1.1, which is the most commonly deployed version right now, to 2.0. It changes a number of things, including, and the reason we have to ship out like that, right, is that one of the biggest things that HTTP 2.0 is designed for is speed due to reuse of the connection. And I'm aware that 1.1 reuses connections, but it really is a synchronous reuse, whereas HTTP 2, that connection is able to just do what it needs. The browser, the server can actually push data down that it knows you're going to need, right? So for example, with 1.1, you request a web page. Your browser receives the web page, and it parses it, and it says, oh, I need this JavaScript, I need this JavaScript, I need this cascading style sheet because we want it to look pretty, and we need this graphic, this graphic, this graphic, and this graphic, and it makes request. Whereas with HTTP 2, when the server pushes the page down, the server can then immediately start pushing the other resources necessary for that page without waiting for the browser to request them, right? Because it knows what makes up that page. And this is one of the speed increases, right? To push content to users faster. And as we see with single page apps and with streaming and all of the client-heavy technologies that we use today, that push, that move to get stuff down to the browser as quickly as possible is critical for the functioning of applications, especially since we have become less patient. How many people here had a 2400 baud modem? Right. Do you remember downloading porn on 2400 baud modems? I'm sorry, bad example, right? You would download a graphic or a executable, right, whatever it was, and you would go out, right? We actually had lives away from our computer because we had wait time, right?
You could see the interlacing take place.
Yeah, you could watch it draw the graphic. You could, right?
Yeah.
It was awesome, right? Now, I saw a statistic online, and we know that everything on the internet is true, right? I saw a statistic online from a marketing company that if your web page is not usable within a second and a half, people will leave your site. Now, I want to be very clear. I don't believe that marketing blurb, right? But I don't think it's far off. People want to see something. They want to be able to react to it, and 2.0 is accepting that, right? Now, from pen testers' perspective, a couple things we want to talk about. First, the high-level syntax hasn't changed. We still have get, post, put, all that kind of stuff, right? The methods haven't changed. The status codes haven't changed. From the application layer, this is the same to us.
The headers are the same. Everything's the same.
Right.
Nothing's changed.
It's the transportation, so the network layer. So we actually dump this down into packets, and that's what's transporting the data, and that's where the change is. So when you look at, if you were to intercept this traffic, right, if you were to capture this traffic, you would see the request go from the server, from the browser to the server, and the server responds with a 101 status code, right, to change protocols. And it actually changes protocol to the HTTP 2.0, or H2 is what you'll see, right, coming down. And at that point, the browser, if the browser supports it, and all modern browsers support HTTP 2, it will convert to the other protocol. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that HTTP 2 works over HTTP and HTTPS. It can handle both. And there's actually a common misconception that a lot of people, including myself in previous presentations, have said HTTP 2 only works over an encrypted channel, right? That is not true by standard. That is true by implementation. Because the majority of browsers today have made the determination that they will only support HTTP 2 connections over HTTPS, right? So even though the standard says it can happen unencrypted, the browser will not support this. And the reason I bring this up, not for the testers here, not for the pen testers, but for the developers. And the reason I say that is because the standard says one thing, and many developers work off of somehow the standard, whether they're trained that way or whatever, they may make the assumption that they can use the system over HTTP. But the reality is you can't. Okay? So that's something to keep in mind as you're dealing with this. I'm getting over a cold and I've got a cough. I apologize. So, and we've already talked about the fact that the server is actually able to push data before the browser requests it, before the client. I should stop saying browser, right? Because the reality is with mobile apps and everything else, the client is what is requesting the data, but the server can push that before the client requests it, if it knows what it's supposed to be pushing down, right? Which is kind of interesting. Now, here's the problem. Let's talk about testing it. How many people here use Zap or Burp? They're awesome, right? They're beautiful. I would like to have Burp's children, right? It's incredible. Both of those interception proxies break HTTP 2. Now you say, wait a minute, Kevin, I've intercepted traffic. Yes, you have. But if you looked at it, it was HTTP 1.1. What happens is the interception proxy blocks the changing protocol message. Remember status code 101? So when that comes down from the server to say, hey, I want to switch from HTTP 1.1 to 2, the proxy says, and doesn't pass that down to the browser. So the conversion over to HTTP 2 doesn't happen. So, and this is really frustrating, says the guy on stage who tried to build an HTTP 2 server, and I'm like, damn it, it works, but it doesn't, because I'm like, what the heck? Every time I talk to it, it said, the proxies will not talk to yet. I don't expect that to change anytime soon because of the difference in how that transport works. So the question becomes, how do we test it, right? If we can't intercept that, what do? Well, we can. Remember what I said at the very beginning, what Gillum said at the very beginning. Your application doesn't care about the underlying protocol in most cases, right? So because it doesn't care whether it's talking 2 or 1.1, If you intercept, it's going to downgrade to 1.1. And as long as the server supports HTTP 1.1, you'll be able to use the interception proxies without a problem and capture that traffic, intercept that traffic, use the same testing techniques that we use today. I hope you understood the one qualifier I just said, as long as the server supports 1.1. Now, in production, in staging, I don't expect you to see very often, anytime soon, servers not supporting 1.1. Heck, we still support SSL 0.93, right? I made that one up. Just see somebody later like, that one doesn't exist, what are you talking about? I don't expect us to see us not supporting 1.1 anytime soon, so I think that's okay today. But we need to start planning toward fixing this, right? The other way to do it is to build a custom client, right? If you want to talk HTTP2 because the server doesn't support it or the application somehow decides to behave differently, which is possible, right? At the application layer, you may want to detect. I personally can't think of a reason, but I also thought the web was stupid. So I'm not sure I should be the one talking, right? But if you run into a situation where the app behaves differently, writing a custom client is the way to handle that, right? And we've had to do this for other reasons. When we talk SOAP web services, when we talk RESTful API, right? Using a custom client is there. We'll talk about that in a second, right? So all of the major platforms that are worthwhile today, you know, and even Java, support support HTTP2. And so what you do is you build the client and you can attack the application. Now, if what you want to do is attack the protocol, let's say you were implementing a server that you created and your server spoke HTTP2, then Scapy is what you would use, right? And that would allow you to attack the protocol. Now, in most cases, a web pen tester isn't doing that. They're doing the application layer, right? But if you're dealing with the protocol itself, Scapy is the method that I would recommend. Nope. The question was, does the API for Burp allow you to do this? And it does not. As of right now, Burp blocks the changing protocol status code. Okay? So, sorry. WebSockets. Ooh. I always think of a light bulb, light socket, and a fork when I think WebSocket. I don't know what it is.
Plug the internet in here?
Yeah.
Kind of like that, I guess.
Yeah. WebSockets is not new. It's been around for a while. It's part of HTML5, right, which is the best thing ever to happen for pen testers. I know, it's also for developers, right? WebSockets is also another protocol. When you hit a web page, the web application could actually send down a message, say, switch protocols, and switch to WebSockets. It's been around longer as a standard than HTTP2. So it's actually more in use right now. And the big difference is, remember I said with HTTP2, at the application layer, it doesn't change things, right? WebSockets does. So as a pen tester, if you're dealing with the application, you have to be able to communicate over the WebSockets protocol, right? So that changes things for you. Excuse me. You're going to see, and I want to be very clear, and I just noticed it on the slide, I keep saying changing protocols. The status code is actually switching protocols. Sorry, guys. I'm an idiot. So you're going to see that switching protocols message. And what's kind of weird, Burp and Zap don't block that. It's the H2 that they block, not, so you'll see the switching protocols message come back, and then in both Burp and Zap, you'll be able to see the WebSockets traffic. You'll be able to intercept the WebSockets traffic. So you can actually test them the same way that you test HTTP. There's a couple qualifiers. Excuse me. WebSocket support is limited in both of the interception proxies. And by that I mean not that they don't understand how to deal with it, it's that not all of the functionality of the proxy works with WebSockets. So I'll pick on Burp for a second because it's the one I prefer, it's the one I'm most comfortable with. When you're working inside of Burp, you can intercept the WebSockets and mangle them. So if it's making the request, you can stop it, change stuff around, and then forward that request on. Or you can see the requests, right? You can't send that request to repeater or intruder or the other tools within Burp, because those tools are built around and understand the HTTP protocol. So when you're dealing with WebSockets, it's really a real-time interception and modification, unlike with HTTP, right? How many times do you capture the traffic and then send it to repeater and mangle it there and then throw it to intruder, right? Exactly, it's how we use it, a lot. WebSockets, you can't do that. So if you've ever heard me speak about how to do interception and how to use Burp, you'll hear me say, don't turn on interception. I now have to qualify that with, don't turn on interception unless you're dealing with WebSockets. Okay? That's the big change with WebSockets. Okay? I can't hear you. So the question was, can you pass that to the API layers? And my answer at that point is, I don't know. I've never tried it. Have you?
I have not tried it either.
Yeah. Would you like me to make up an answer? No, it's okay.
Sure, it can be done.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, it might be. I don't know, though. Sorry.
So, the next thing we're going to talk about is cores, which is something I've been looking at for a while. Cross-origin resource sharing. So this is the answer to getting around same origin policy. This is what developers do with all those AJAX calls, right? So it used to be that we put everything into iframes if we wanted to bring up content from another site. Now the common way to do it is through AJAX calls, or it's not always AJAX, I guess, but it's the web calls. Yeah. And you bring the content in, you use a CORS policy to get around that. So the same origin policy, that's that browser-enforced policy.
Sorry for laughing. I'm really bothered by this slide.
Stormtroopers on here somewhere, and I know they're not clones.
Yeah, I'm really bothered by this slide.
They're stormtroopers.
Gilla made the comment, well, they're clones. Like, no, stormtroopers aren't clones.
I can't tell the difference.
Clone troopers are clones.
So, by the way, we do have, at our booth, we do have two helmets there. One is the clone helmet, the other one's the stormtrooper helmet. Yeah. See if you can tell the difference.
Of course you can.
So basically, the same origin policy, it prevents code running in one place, of course, from interacting with content somewhere else. But we have ways around that. So same origin policy is defined as you have your protocol, you have your host, you have your port. Those three things together, that makes your origin. If any of those are different, then you're actually talking about a different origin.
And keep in mind that when we talk about same origin, it's the origin of the script tag that is loading the content. Mm-hmm. So if www.securideas.com loads a script tag, but the source of the script tag is www.professionalevil.com, the origin is securideas.com, because that's where the script tag was from, not where the JS was from. That's what enables you to load like the Google Analytics scripts from Google's server, but have that script interact with your website, right? Because the origin is from your site. Yeah. That confuses a lot of people when they first start looking at this.
Yeah, it is the origin of where the script is actually running, what it's allowed to talk to. So that's one, actually you just explained one of a couple of sort of exceptions to the same origin policy. One is, I mean, you can pull JavaScript or CSS or images from other places. So that's not really an exception to the same origin policy, but kind of. The other one, though, that is definitely an exception to it is if there is a CORS policy in place, right? So that's what's going to allow, let's say we have securideas.com and it wants to load content from professionalevil.com. So it's going to, the professionalevil.com will have a policy that allows content to be loaded from securideas.com.
And I want to make sure you caught that. It's the source of the, like, what it's asking for that controls the CORS policy. Yeah. So securideas.com can't set a CORS policy for Amazon.com, right? Amazon would set that CORS policy, even though SecurideAs would be requesting the content.
So how do you find out if something has a CORS policy in place? What's that? Okay, well, the answer's on the screen, so. But you are right. So if there's an origin header in there, then that's all it takes. So you can either fabricate one, you can take an existing request and add an origin header, or you can look at existing traffic in your proxy history, and you're going to see, of course, an origin header there. And in response to that origin header, if you see the policy in place, then you will know that it actually has one, and also have an idea how it should work. So those are your options there. So this is kind of small, but it's an example. So there's an origin header, and then you get your access control allow whatever it is, whatever part of the policy. So there's on this one here we have credentials, we have origin, we have methods. So the policy can include various different things. There's more than just those three as well, but those are the most common ones. Now, the important thing from a testing standpoint, I think, to realize is that having a global policy, so this is something that shows up a lot. You have some content out there on a website, and they put a CORS policy, access control, allow, origin, star. So it's a global policy. And when that happens, we start thinking, well, isn't that kind of like a Flash cross-domain policy? Isn't that bad? And the reality is it's not really, because we haven't allowed any credentials, which means credentials would be cookies, right, being sent. That's what the policy refers to as cookies, credentials. And those are not there. So a global policy by itself is not really the same thing. That's for public content, basically.
Right. Basically, the idea is that if in Flash, if you guys remember back to the weaponized Flash talk, right? If you had a splat there, that meant that anybody could load the content, they could grab credentials, cookies, things like that. With CORS, the browser won't, if the policy is set to global, if it's set to a splat, the browser won't send the cookies, right? So the browser controls that, which is kind of nice, right?
Yeah, that's a key differentiator there. And you'll see actually some tools, Burp maybe, will actually report every time it sees a global policy that, hey, this is a really serious problem. So at that point, you have to really look at it and determine if it is. There's a few considerations you want to keep in mind. First of all, if there is a global policy, is it something that, is that content actually, does it really need to be protected in any way? I mean, is it stuff that we don't want to be public? I mean, if it's something that you don't want to be publicly put onto other pages for some reason, then maybe it causes an issue, but generally it doesn't. Most of the time, a global policy with CORS is not an issue. But what is an issue is if there's a very specific set of origins that are accepted, then any cross-site scripting flaw on those origins. So let's say, back to our example, let's say professionalevil.com has some content that it's making available to securideas.com. And securideas.com, let's just say it had a cross-site scripting vulnerability.
Which has never happened.
Doesn't, but let's say it did. That would mean that we could use that cross-site scripting vulnerability on securideas.com to attack professionalevil.com. It would actually be able to interact with the content on that page. So it expands the scope of our same origin policy. The other thing that we might want to look at too with CORS policy is, are there ways of taking something that was supposed to be, maybe initially intended to be an encrypted call, and making it over an unencrypted call as well. But that still requires, man-in-the-middle type of capabilities. It's the same sort of thing as the Starbucks intercepting the Wi-Fi and getting in the middle of that. So.
RESTful APIs, which I always want to think means naps, but it doesn't. Naps would be nice, right? Aren't they? Yeah. So the RESTful APIs, though. RESTful is a representational state transfer, REST, right? I just realized something. In my bio, I have pictures of my kid.
Yeah.
In the slides, you put pictures of your cat.
That's my cat. The cat tree, just a quick story on that. With the cat tree, we got it for her when she was a kitten, and she used to curl up when I was working, and for some reason she thinks she can still fit in there, so That was actually taken recently.
So RESTful APIs is really an architectural style, not a protocol, right? So when we talk about REST, a lot of people think, oh, okay, so you're going to change the way requests are made, stuff like that. No, they're not. There's still HTTP or HTTPS calls. The protocol still looks the same, right? It's just how the architecture works.
Correct.
Well,
What, is that what you want? No?
no, go. Yeah, you're fine.
Well, you're not shaking your hands at me.
I know. Sorry.
We rehearsed this many times.
A million. So when you look at RESTful, you have the API calls, and you've got get, post, put, delete, right? And by the way, a lot of pen testers who've never dealt with REST, they see the put request or they see the delete request, and they immediately think, yes, right? Because put and delete are methods that for years we have said, oh, that's bad, because by standard on HTTP, a put request puts the content at that resource if you have permissions. A delete request deletes the resource. That's not what happens with a RESTful API. Put is putting data into the API, right? Delete is sending a delete request for data, right? Doing stuff just like a post is posting a transaction, where a get is getting data back.
And just for clarification, that's strictly speaking if you're doing REST. But what actually happens a lot of the time is they all end up being get calls or post calls anyway. So it really depends on how they've implemented it, and developers will do whatever they feel like doing, it seems.
Now, with RESTful APIs, where the focus has to be is on the client, right? Because we don't, now of course if it's a white box test and we have a list of all the API calls, that's great, we can then just make them. But most of us aren't in that position. Most of us aren't being given a RESTful API to look at and handed all of the API calls. So what we have to do is we have to focus on the client, right? During our methodology, right, we do mapping. We map how the application works. We have to understand what all the transactions look like, and that focus on that mapping stage should have us discover the APIs we have access to. Now, of course, we can also go after other ones to see if they exist and they just weren't exercised during the time we were testing them, right? But we should be able to see them based on what the client is doing. So the JavaScript is going to be making requests, the Flash object, the mobile app, the whatever, that client application is going to show us what those RESTful API calls look like. And then we can use the same tools we use to test regular HTTP to test those. Or
the way that we're supposed to anyway.
Right.
Because one of the things that you're going to realize is if you bring up Burp and start running an automated scan against something that has a RESTful API, you're probably not going to get very far. It's not going to understand where the parameters are. So you actually have to think about the API and work your way through it and manually figure out where the payload positions are going to be.
Sorry. So another set of clients, though, are available to you. You can use the advanced REST client. You can use Postman. You can even use SOAP UI. So if you've been doing SOAP testing and you've used SOAP UI to do that, it has RESTful capabilities. In my opinion, and I don't mean to bash anything, the RESTful capabilities in SOAP UI seem to be more of an afterthought, right? Since they were building an application to test SOAP-based APIs, and it's like a customer said, hey, could you do RESTful also? And they went, yeah. And it's a checkbox, right? But the advanced REST client is kind of cool.
Now, the best one to use really depends on the engagement. Best thing to do is figure out what the developers are using. And if you can get like if you're just testing an app, if you can get one of their, basically an output from theirs, so they do an export of whatever their test project is. And if they're using SOAP UI, then you can import it into SOAP UI. If they're using advanced REST client, you import it in there. And that way you'll have an idea of what all the API calls are. So definitely ask for that if you're getting on an engagement and it's all REST-based. See if they have a project file they can share with you in something. Make use of that. That'll save you a ton of time.
Right. Now, we already talked about focusing on the client, but what should we look for, right? If we test these apps, what considerations, what risks should we be looking for? And there really is 4 different places that you should look. One is authentication. I don't know what it is, but people seem to focus like, oh man, that web app, you got to authenticate to do that. They definitely have to authenticate. But the minute you talk about an API, it's like, oh yeah, that's fine, it's open, right? Like, it's good. Or you have people who, like the customer I just talked to a couple, like last week, who said to me, well, you tested authentication, right? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, you logged in. And? Well, wasn't that a test of authentication? No, that was a test to see if I could type my password right. Right? Like, that's not, But, so you're going to want to look at authentication. A lot of times APIs, authentication is broken. You also want to look at the data. How and where is it used, right? One of the things that I find quite often, Gillum finds quite often, is that because there's so much client-side consideration, right? So much data is coming down to the client, that a lot of times the application developer will build the app to return more data than is necessary and allows the client to parse it and only display what it needs to. A bad example of that, but one I see quite often, is you'll see fuzzed or censored social security numbers or credit card numbers in the app. But if you look at the data transfer, it's the full number with no information X'd out, censored in any way, right? It's the client. Well, what does that mean? It means I got the full number, right? That's good. We had a customer who was very, very proud of their authorization system. When you first went to their site, they asked you these sensitive questions like, hey, did you live here? Is this your income? Is this? And you had to be able to answer them correctly. You had to give them your social security number correctly and all this kind of stuff. And we intercepted the traffic, and they were using a RESTful API. And basically what would happen is you would come to the site, give a number that was your ID, right? And it would go back to the API and say, hey, I need all the information about ID number 42, which would return all of that data down in a JSON object that the client side would say, okay, here's the question I have to ask you. I know the answer. It's right there, right? Yeah. It's awesome.
I remember that one. That was embarrassing.
That was, because we're sitting there, and we weren't even testing it yet. We were in the conversations, the scoping, and I just said to the guy, hey, the way you're describing it doesn't make sense. Would you mind if you could just show us, right? Could you just show us how the app works? He goes, oh, yeah, I'd love to show you. He was very proud of his app. That sounded inappropriate. But he was very, very proud of it. So we intercepted it with burp, and I looked at it, and I went, you know how that works, right? You look and go, no. And Gillum was sitting across. I'm sitting here. The dude is sitting next to me, and Gillum's across.
I'm on the
I'm
other
like,
side. Yeah.
Hey, Gillum, look. And I show it to him. And to give Gillum credit, right, he thought better of the customer.
I said, no way he did that. But I said it out loud.
No. Right? And the customer's sitting there, and the customer's like, what? Well, basically, dude, you suck. But, right? Yeah. So you want to look at data. You also want to look at session management, right? See how it's handling.
REST is sessionless, though, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's totally sessionless. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. And then finally, don't forget, fuzz this the same way you would fuzz any other web application, right? I always love talking to people, and they're like, I found a cross-site scripting flaw in your RESTful API. Oh, no, that can't be possible, because, the browsers don't interact with it. Of course the browsers interact with it, right? They just interact with it through JavaScript or something, right? Fuzz them the same way. Don't leave that out. Oh, sorry.
All right. Next one we're going to talk about is content security policy. So this will be quick. Basically, have you ever been in that situation where you're trying to get that alert pop-up box or whatever it is you're trying to get to run on there to work, and for some reason it just doesn't want to work?
So mean.
One thing you need to look for is whether or not that page has a content security policy in place. Basically, well, it's a whole bunch of text. So basically, a content security policy is something that will be in a meta tag or in a header, and it will, in essence, you can control a lot of things, but in essence, the main thing that it can do is it can prevent inline scripting from actually working. So that means all scripts, all JavaScript has to be loaded from a file in order to work on that page. So if you're trying to inject inline cross-site scripting payload onto the page, it'll get on the page, it just won't run. The browser's going to say, no, I have a content security policy that says I can't do that, and it just kind of moves on. And I really wanted to point out that CSP is something that is not often implemented still. And part of the problem with it is it's a real pain to implement because it breaks a whole bunch of things. So if a developer decides, hey, I don't have this yet, it looks really cool, it's going to protect my page, they're right. But if they try to implement it, they're going to end up breaking a lot of their existing stuff because a lot of them actually have a lot of things like inline JavaScript that's just not going to work. So there's a lot of things they have to set up there. But it is a developing standard. 2.0 is already out there, and 3 is fairly active. It looks like they're making a lot of changes. So something I'm keeping an eye on. The two places to look, like I said, is there's a response header that'll come back with content-security-policy or a meta tag.
Nice. And now the last part of the talk. Samurai WTF. Just to be clear, that stands for Web Testing Framework. Honest. So Samurai WTF has been out for a while. It actually surprised me. Because I'm not real good with calendars. And just recently I was talking to somebody and they were like, man, you know, that project's been around for at least like ever. And I'm like, no man, we released it like 4 years ago or something. And he's like, no, it was longer than that. And
that was last week somebody asked you that, right?
Yeah. It was 8 years ago that we released Samurai WTF 0.9 or whatever. And I'm looking at some of the people in the room that helped with it. Right? And I'm embarrassed by some of the stuff I put out back then. Right? We're working on it. So there's a team of us working. Gillum and I work on it. Justin Searle works on it. We've got a number of people helping us randomly. And we're trying to make it better. So 4.0 is a switch slightly in what we're doing. What we're doing is we're releasing a VM. And I want to be very clear because we had somebody get really, really angry. Gillum's laughing because it's the first time I saw the Canadian get rude. So we used to release Samurai as an ISO, and you could boot it right from the ISO. And the way we were doing that broke sometime in 1785 or something. And so we've been releasing it as a VM for a while, and this guy, like, where's the ISO? We don't have one anymore. Why not? Well, because we don't, right? We're lazy. No, we just don't. It's bigger than an ISO can be, and I haven't taken the time to go figure out the new method of building it, okay? And so we have a VM. If anybody wants to build an ISO, please, we'll work with you. We'd like that, but we just aren't doing it. But it's a virtual machine, and a couple of the big differences that we're working on here to build this out new, right, excuse me, is we want to focus the application more. Now, I already talked a little bit about the setup. It is a virtual machine. By the way, it's built on VMware. If you use VirtualBox, first, I'm sorry. Second, it will work, all right? You just have to set that up yourself. The big thing that most people have a problem with is the memory size. A lot of people will boot Samurai in the VM, and for some reason, they'll set the memory really, really low, and then not understand why it doesn't run. It needs at least 2 gigs of RAM. It is a graphical desktop that you're using, okay? Now, big differences, the important things we want to talk about. One of the main differences in 4.0, MOBA Sec is no longer a separate project. So the people who know, OWASP MOBA Sec was a DARPA-funded project where we built mobile security testing and training and stuff like that. And what we've been doing is we've been trying to maintain 2 environments that have a lot of overlap. So what we're doing with 4.0 is we are combining the 2 of them, and in that environment you'll be dealing with mobile and web at the same time. So that's a big difference, right? Which is kind of nice. Another difference is our main focus is now training. What we have found in talking to people is that most people are looking to learn how to test this stuff, right? And so what we're doing is we're building in more of the vulnerable targets, more of the understanding and explanations of how to do testing. Because while I'm a greedy capitalist and would like everybody to think, hey, if I want a web pen test, call Secure Ideas, the reality is we don't scale that well. We want you to be able to test your own stuff. As much as I like testing it for you, I am really tired of finding search boxes that I can put a script alert XSS in and get a pop-up.
Yeah.
That's lame. I really want to do more exciting things. So if I teach you how to test better, I can do the logic and the difficult testing, right? Be more fun. So we want to train people. We want you to be able to build skills, and we want you to be able to build skills in a safe way. Because the other thing I'm tired of is idiots thinking it's fun to test my site, right? And I love the reports. You're vulnerable to SQL injection. Really, my static website is vulnerable to SQL injection. Yes, I put a single quote in the URL and I got an error message. Yes, you did. It's because that file wasn't found. So we want to train them in an environment they can, right? So it's all self-contained. Finally, and this is something Justin Searle has been working on for years, and we're finally getting to a point where we may be able to release it soon, and that is packages. Instead of you downloading a full VM that's 87 bajillion petabytes, right? It's an exaggeration. You'll be able to take any Ubuntu or Debian system and basically say apt-get install Samurai WTF. And it will pull the packages down, right? That is the goal, and we're working on it. Now here's the bad news, and I hate when people do this. I was hoping to be able to say, go download it now. Billable work wins. Sorry, guys.
Not ready yet.
We are working on getting it out. We are hoping that it will be out any day now, but that isn't going to happen like tomorrow. Okay? So I apologize. I'm sorry? We'll have it Sunday. No, we won't have it Sunday. We're working on it. We're getting it out there for you. Okay? But Samurai 4.0 is coming, and anything you guys want to see on it, let us know. Okay? So, I'm sorry? So at that point, I'm going to say thank you very much. It is time for us to let you guys get back to the rest of your day.